What if a single act of kindness could rewrite a destiny? Imagine a struggling single mom facing daily hardships who extends a simple gesture of warmth to a complete stranger. You won't believe how this seemingly small moment transforms her life and changes the course of a reclusive billionaire's future. Morning sunlight crept timidly through the worn curtains of a tiny apartment on the city's east side. Dust motes danced in the golden light as Sarah stirred awake, the faint hum of traffic blending with the soft snores of her 8-year-old son, Ethan, sleeping in the next room. The small space smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, a place that carried more love than luxury. Sarah stretched, brushing back strands of chestnut hair that had escaped her messy bun, and moved quietly toward the kitchen. On the table lay a stack of unpaid bills, reminders of how close she lived to the edge each month. Rent, electricity, groceries. Every line on the paper demanded more than her tired body could give. Yet as she packed Ethan's lunch into a small, dented metal box, her lips curved into a smile. No matter how heavy life became, she refused to let her son see the weight she carried. Ethan stumbled out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes, his red hoodie crookedly zipped. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, and she pulled him into a hug. For a moment, all the worries faded. "Morning, champ. Eat your breakfast before it gets cold." He grinned up at her, the same grin that kept her going. The clock on the wall ticked too fast, as it always did. She tied her apron around her waist, checked her reflection in the tiny mirror by the door, and sighed. The woman staring back looked older than 28, eyes ringed with fatigue, skin pale from long hours under fluorescent diner lights, but there was a quiet fire in her gaze, the kind born from love and necessity. The morning air bit sharply as Sarah stepped outside. She tugged her coat tighter and walked Ethan to the bus stop, waving until the yellow bus disappeared down the street. Then she turned toward the diner, her pace brisk but her thoughts heavy. Every day followed the same rhythm: serve, smile, survive. Still, today felt different. The clouds hung low, the city colder, the silence between passing cars unusually deep. As she crossed a small park near the diner, something caught her eye. On a worn-out bench sat a young man in a hooded sweatshirt, his shoulders hunched, his jeans soaked from last night's rain. A backpack rested at his feet, and his hands trembled slightly as he rubbed them together for warmth. People passed him without a glance. Businessmen in suits, mothers pushing strollers, teens with headphones. He might as well have been invisible. Sarah hesitated. She didn't have much to give. Her own wallet held only a few crumpled bills. But something about the man's stillness, the lost look in his blue eyes, tugged at her heart. She paused, feeling that quiet voice inside her whisper, "Don't walk away." Pulling her coat tighter, she took a slow breath. Maybe fate had placed him there for a reason. Maybe kindness, however small, was all she had left to offer. And maybe it would be enough to change both their lives forever. Rain fell steadily that evening, painting the city in silver streaks as headlights shimmered across wet pavement. Sarah stood under the flickering sign of Ellen's Diner, clutching her umbrella against the wind. Her shift had ended late, and her feet ached from hours of serving coffee and smiles to strangers who barely noticed her. The streets were almost empty now, save for the rhythmic splatter of rain and the occasional honk in the distance. As she started her walk home, she pulled her thin coat closer, her stomach growling faintly. She'd skip dinner again so Ethan could have extra milk in the morning. But as she rounded the corner near the park, her steps slowed. There he was again, the same man from that morning, still sitting on the same bench, his hood pulled up, raindrops glistening on his shoulders. For a moment, she stood in the shadows, watching him. His posture hadn't changed. He sat motionless, his face tilted slightly down, hands buried deep in his pockets. The world had washed around him, indifferent and uncaring. Her heart clenched. He's someone's son, she thought. Someone's child who's lost his way. She hesitated only a moment longer before walking toward him. Her shoes splashed through shallow puddles as she approached, her umbrella trembling slightly in her grip. "Hey, are you okay?" Her voice was gentle, almost uncertain. The young man looked up slowly, His blue eyes were distant, weary, the kind of eyes that had seen too much for their age. "I just need to be alone," he muttered, voice rough from the cold. Sarah nodded softly, understanding that tone all too well. But as she studied his face, she noticed the faint shiver in his lips, the wet clothes clinging to his skin. "You'll freeze out here," she said quietly. "Wait here." Before he could protest, she turned and hurried down the street, her heart racing. Inside her small purse was a paper takeout box, leftovers from the diner. It wasn't much, just a chicken sandwich and half a slice of pie, but it was warm. When she returned, he was still there, eyes lowered, as if expecting her to walk past like everyone else. Instead, she knelt beside him, holding out the box. "Here," she said, forcing a smile despite the rain dripping from her hair. "It's not fancy, but it's hot." He blinked, clearly taken aback. "Why?" he asked softly. Sarah shrugged. "Because you look like you could use it." For a long moment he stared at her, the sound of rain filling the silence. Then hesitantly, he reached out and took the box. "Thank you," he whispered, voice breaking slightly. She stood, brushing rain from her sleeves, and smiled one last time before walking away into the downpour. Behind her, the stranger, Liam, opened the box and stared at the steaming food. His chest tightened. No one had looked at him like a human being in months. In that small act, that single fragile moment of compassion, something inside him began to thaw, and though neither of them knew it yet, that simple act of kindness on a rainy night would become the spark that would rewrite both of their destinies forever. A week had passed since that rain-soaked night, yet Sarah couldn't get the young man's face out of her mind. Something about his quiet eyes lingered, the way they held both pride and pain. Life had returned to its routine rhythm. The alarm clock's shrill cry at dawn, Ethan's sleepy grin over breakfast, and the long hours spent at Ellen's diner serving customers who rarely remembered her name. Still, as she passed the park each morning, she found herself looking toward that same bench, half expecting him to be there. And one morning the sky was pale blue, washed clean from last night's drizzle, and the city carried the fresh scent of wet earth. The man sat on the bench again, head bowed, but this time there was something different. His hair was combed, his clothes cleaner. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before walking toward him, a paper cup of steaming coffee and a muffin in hand. "You again," he said quietly, his tone more surprised than annoyed. His lips curved into a faint, almost shy smile. Sarah handed him the coffee. "Don't look so shocked," she teased lightly. "You think I'd let someone sit out here without breakfast?" He chuckled softly, shaking his head as he accepted it. "You really don't have to do this." "Maybe not," she replied, sitting beside him on the damp bench. "But sometimes it's nice to be reminded that people still care." The park was unusually quiet that morning. Just the chirping of birds and the distant hum of traffic. For a long moment they sat in silence, sipping coffee, the air between them calm and unforced. Then, without looking up, the man spoke. "My name's Liam." "Sarah," she replied warmly. "So, Liam, what brings you out here?" He hesitated, fingers tightening around the cup. "I needed to get away," he said finally. "From everything. From my life." His voice carried a weight she didn't understand, but instinctively respected. "My father, he's rich, powerful. He built an empire, but he never built a family. I walked away from all of it, the money, the name, the expectations. I thought I could find myself out here, but all I found was emptiness." His eyes met hers then, unguarded and raw. "You probably think I'm crazy." Sarah smiled gently. "No, I think you're human." That simple sentence seemed to disarm him. For the first time in months he felt seen, not as a disappointment, not as an heir, but as a person. They talked for hours that morning, about life, choices, and loneliness. She told him about Ethan, about the small joys that kept her going even when the world felt unfair. When they finally stood to leave, Liam looked lighter, as if her words had taken some of his burden away. As Sarah walked toward the diner, she glanced back and saw him still sitting there, gazing at the coffee cup with a strange look of peace. She didn't know it yet, but her kindness had begun stitching together the pieces of a broken man, a man whose true identity would soon shake her world in ways she never imagined. The days blurred together as Sarah fell back into her daily rhythm, work, home, and the quiet struggle to stretch every dollar. Yet something in her had changed since meeting Liam. Their brief encounters at the park had become a strange kind of comfort. She found herself looking forward to their short conversations. His hesitant smiles, the way his eyes softened whenever she spoke about Ethan. But then, without warning, he vanished. For nearly 2 weeks, Liam never showed up again. Each morning, as Sarah passed the park on her way to work, the bench sat empty, glistening with dew. She told herself not to care. He was a stranger after all, but a part of her missed him. Missed knowing that her kindness had made someone's day a little brighter. It was a Friday evening when her world quietly shifted again. The diner was nearly empty, the dull hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. Sarah was wiping down the counter, her reflection flickering in the window as neon lights blinked from the street outside. The bell above the door jingled, and she turned automatically with her practiced smile. But the smile froze on her lips. Standing in the doorway was Liam, though not the Liam she remembered. Gone were the worn hoodie and hollow eyes. The man before her looked confident, his hair neatly styled, his posture straight. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed to belong to another world, the world he had once told her he'd walked away from. "Hey, Sarah," he said softly, that familiar warmth still in his voice. Her heart skipped. "Liam," she breathed. I didn't even recognize you." He smiled sheepishly, stepping closer. "Yeah, I cleaned up a bit." His tone was light, but his eyes carried something deeper. Gratitude, affection, maybe even guilt. "I came to thank you. You don't know what your kindness meant to me that night. It pulled me out of something I didn't think I could escape." Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "You don't have to thank me, Liam. I just did what anyone should do." "Not everyone would have stopped," he said quietly. "You didn't see a failure or a stranger, you saw a person. And because of that, I found my way back." From his coat pocket, he pulled out an envelope and placed it on the counter. "I know you'll want to refuse it, but this isn't charity. It's appreciation." Sarah opened it slightly and froze. Inside was a check large enough to erase every debt, every sleepless worry. "Liam, I can't take this," she said firmly, shaking her head. He smiled, understanding. "Then consider it a promise that I'll pay it forward just like you did for me." For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the struggling single mom and the man she'd unknowingly saved. When he finally turned to leave, the neon light flickered across his face, and she saw it clearly now. Beneath the expensive suit, he was still the same lost soul she'd fed on a rainy night. And as the door closed behind him, Sarah realized that kindness, once given, has a way of always finding its way back. The next morning at Ellen's diner began like any other. The clatter of plates, the hiss of coffee machines, and the faint hum of the radio playing in the background. Sarah moved between tables with her usual quiet grace, offering practiced smiles to regulars and refilling mugs without being asked. But beneath her calm exterior lingered a whirl of emotions from the night before. She hadn't been able to sleep properly, replaying every second of her encounter with Liam, his transformation, his words, that envelope she still hadn't opened all the way. It was all too much to make sense of. She had met a lost soul and helped him, and now he had returned, seemingly reborn. Something about him haunted her, not in a painful way, but in a way that made her heart ache with curiosity. Who really was he? The bell over the door chimed, snapping her from her thoughts. Her co-worker Marta walked in, shaking rain from her umbrella. "Morning, Sarah," she said cheerfully, setting her purse behind the counter. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah laughed softly, brushing off the comment. "Just tired," she replied, though her eyes drifted to the envelope tucked safely in her apron pocket. She hadn't told anyone about Liam's visit. Something about it felt personal, sacred even. As the day wore on, a sudden commotion broke the monotony. Marta turned up the volume on the small TV mounted in the corner. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "After months away from the public eye, Liam Kensington, heir to the Kensington Group, has returned to take over the family empire following his father's illness." Sarah froze, the tray in her hands trembling slightly. Her gaze darted to the screen. The camera showed a press conference outside a gleaming skyscraper, and there he was, Liam. The same man who had sat hungry and cold on a park bench now stood behind microphones, wearing that same tailored suit she had seen last night. Cameras flashed as he spoke calmly to reporters, his voice steady, his smile confident. Marta gasped. "Oh my God, that's the billionaire's son! Can you imagine what it's like to even meet someone like that?" Sarah's lips parted, but no words came. Her mind spun. Liam Kensington. The name echoed in her head. He hadn't lied. He really had walked away from it all. And all this time, she had treated him like an ordinary man. She hadn't cared about his money, his background, or his name, and maybe that was exactly what he had needed. Marta nudged her playfully. "You okay?" "You're white as a ghost," Sarah blinked, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I'm fine, just surprised." But as she turned back to the counter, her reflection caught in the chrome surface of the coffee machine. She saw herself, the same simple woman in a worn uniform, and realized something profound. For once, her kindness had rippled far beyond her little world. She had changed someone powerful, and in doing so, she had changed herself. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight spilled across the street, warm and golden. Sarah glanced toward it, her smile faint but genuine. Fate, it seemed, had a strange way of rewarding the heart that gives without expecting anything in return. A few months had passed since Liam Kensington's return to the public eye, yet life for Sarah remained much the same. Or so it appeared. The diner still buzzed with its familiar chorus of clinking cups and sizzling pans, and the smell of coffee still lingered on her apron long after she went home. But inside her, something had quietly shifted. There was a new calm in her heart, a subtle strength that came from knowing that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple outward into something extraordinary. She often wondered about Liam, not as the billionaire heir who filled the news, but as the quiet young man who once sat shivering on a park bench. Though their worlds had diverged once more, she carried his memory like a warm ember, a reminder that kindness never truly ends. It just changes form. One bright Saturday morning, while Sarah and Ethan were having pancakes in their tiny apartment, a letter slid under the door. It wasn't a bill or an advertisement. It was an elegant white envelope, embossed with a gold seal that read Kensington Foundation. Frowning in curiosity, she opened it and read aloud, "You are warmly invited to the opening of the Kensington Community Centre, a space built to empower and support single parents and children in need. Your presence would mean the world." Beneath it was a simple note, handwritten in familiar script, "For the woman who reminded me what humanity means." "Liam," her hands trembled slightly as she folded the letter. "Mom?" Ethan asked, eyes wide. "Are we going somewhere?" She smiled, eyes glistening. "Yes, sweetheart. Somewhere special." Later that afternoon, Sarah and Ethan stood before a gleaming new building, surrounded by a small crowd and flashing cameras. The sign above the glass doors read, "Kensington Foundation Community Centre." Balloons swayed in the warm breeze, and volunteers handed out programs to families gathered for the ribbon cutting. Sarah felt small amidst the crowd, her worn dress and modest shoes contrasting with the polished suits around her. Yet as she stepped forward, heads turned. She wasn't sure why until she saw him. Liam stood at the podium, delivering his speech with quiet confidence. The sunlight reflected off his suit, but his smile, that familiar, genuine smile, was the same. "This centre," he said, voice steady, "is more than a building. It's a promise that no one should face hardship alone. It's dedicated to those who choose kindness, even when they have little to give. To those who remind us of what truly matters." His gaze found her in the crowd. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the noise around them faded. Sarah's throat tightened as tears filled her eyes. She realized then that this was not just his redemption, it was hers too. Her one small act of compassion had grown into something far greater than she ever imagined. When the applause erupted, she held Ethan's hand tightly, smiling through her tears. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold, Liam approached her quietly. "I told you kindness comes back," he said softly. She laughed through her tears. "You were right." And in that moment, beneath the warm light of a new beginning, two lives that had once collided by chance stood side by side, proof that a single act of kindness can indeed rewrite destiny. Would you have stopped to help a stranger? Tell us below. Subscribe to Drew Daily Stories for more emotional, single-parent and billionaire tales that touch the heart.